All right, I know there's going to be people filing in, but just in the interest of everybody's time, I'm going to go ahead and get started. Welcome, everybody, to the July edition of the DuPage ROSC presentation series. My name is Jared Burton. I'm your ROSC coordinator. If you've never attended one of these presentation series meetings, it's really a chance for us to take a little bit more time to dig into topics that are along the substance use and mental health continuum. Take a look at new and different and sometimes out of the box ways of approaching therapeutics. And we definitely have a good one for you here today. Before we get into the presentation though, I want to go ahead and do some housekeeping stuff. So I'm going to do a quick share and we can go over some things that are coming up. If everybody could see that, just give me a thumbs up. All right, thumbs up. So just a couple of meetings and trainings and stuff coming up that I want to touch on. The next meeting of the actual council is going to be on Wednesday, August 14th at 3 p.m. Just a reminder, our council meets on the second Wednesday of every month at 3 p.m. If you've attended our ROSC council meetings before, you know that the in-person portion is usually held at Serenity House in Addison. But next month, we're actually going to hold the in-person part of that meeting at the new location, which is at the Addison Township building. Addison Township was nice enough to give us a little bit of office space and some all-purpose room space because our particular ROSC and RCO office was just adding too many people. Danny can tell you from experience, he's in there right now. Sometimes it was like fitting 8 or 9 people into one office. It just wasn't going to work. So we got to do office space. We're going to hold that in-person part at that building. And we're probably going to create a little networking meet and greet event around it. I'm going to have more information about that coming up. We'll hopefully have some resource tables and a chance to kind of hang out a little bit in person. So you'll definitely want to be there for that. We got presentations from YWCA Metropolitan, who we've been trying to get with us for a while. It's just with scheduling, sometimes it's a little difficult. But really importantly, we're going to talk about our findings from our focus groups that we did a few months ago. With justice-involved individuals in recovery. So I'm really, really looking forward to that report. That was a fantastic focus group. So hopefully it'll give us a little bit better feel for what those people are facing, people who are getting out of being incarcerated. This is the thing I say all the time. It's difficult enough to re-enter after being incarcerated if you don't have a substance use challenge, but if you have both, it can be doubly difficult. So really interested in hearing what the feedback is from that focus group. Tomorrow, which is the third Thursday of the month, we actually have our virtual Narcan training. Now, this is through the DuPage RCO, but we will be holding that virtually. If you are trained on Narcan already, that's great, but this is a good brush up. And if you have never heard of Narcan before whatsoever in your life and you want to learn kind of like a 101, this is a good one to join. We also go over what are like the trends that we're seeing as we do harm reduction work in DuPage County. So talking about things like, obviously fentanyl, xylazine, other adulterants, and really taking a look at what the overdose numbers are looking like in DuPage County. So we hope you can join us for that. It's used to be at 3:30, we moved it to 12:30. Figure people maybe on their lunch breaks are able to join us. So if you can, that'd be awesome. We are currently holding our quarterly item drive. So we are collecting new socks. I have to stress that, new socks of all sizes for our donation drive, which we're doing for the Glen Ellen Public Library. We recently put in a Narcan wall box at the Glen Ellen Library. While we were there, we were talking to the librarians and they showed us they have kind of like a community closet pantry type area where they provide stuff like toiletries, feminine products, you name it. And it gets a lot of use. And when we asked them, how can we support this? Is there anything we can donate? Without even hesitating, they said socks. Socks are the #1 item. I like to speak with lived experience as someone that was formerly unhoused. New socks are worth their weight in gold. So we'll be happy to collect any socks. You can do a drop off at Serenity House, hopefully within those working hours, 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. Or you can contact me if you want to do a separate drop off or you want me to pick some stuff up, that's fine too. But feel free to reach out for that. If you have not joined the DuPage ROSC Referral Hub, I'm not going to go through this entire flyer, but I am going to promote it. We have a WhatsApp group full of about 105 individuals who all we do is work on referrals with each other. Kind of the little short backstory of this was we created a group text of professionals and people with lived experience to help each other with timely referrals. The idea being when somebody is ready for help, when somebody is ready to enter detox or treatment of any kind, we always have a very short window of opportunity. And sometimes if we cannot find that person a bed or find that person those services within a few hours, they can change their mind. You know, other bad things can happen. So we created this group text that outgrew the text format and is now into the WhatsApp. So if you're interested in joining, it's completely free. It's completely easy to use. And if you're always looking for referrals of any kind, and that's, like I said, everything from detoxes and residential to, lawyer assistance, grief support, medically assisted recovery, whatever you want, we're helping with referrals on that. Danny, who's on the meeting with us, you can contact him. His email address is on that flyer, and he can maybe drop it in the chat as well. As we know, coming up next month is Overdose Awareness Day and Overdose Awareness Month, and DuPage ROSC is teaming up with Live for Lolly and the DuPage Health Department to do a presentation on harm reduction and substance use disorders. We'll be talking about harm reduction, why it's important, talking about the different types of treatment options and what to expect, and we'll also go into data that we've seen from Impact DuPage on substance use in DuPage County, but also if we're making a dent with the harm reduction work that we're doing. So registration is required. There's a nice QR code up there if this is something that might interest you. Go ahead and take a look at that QR code. But that's 9:30 to 10:30 a.m. on August 28th. Last little bit before we get into the presentation, just some upcoming things. In August, on the 14th, that's that ROSC Council meeting with the YWCA and the focus group stuff. The next presentation series is going to be on harm reduction because, as we said, August is overdose awareness. We're going to be hitting that really, really hard. And then the 29th is our annual Overdose Awareness Day event at Serenity House. If you haven't attended one of those, it's always a really, really good time. It's very inspirational, very moving. We usually get at least 200 plus people at that event, so we would love to have you at that one. In September, on the 14th, we have our third annual DuPage ROSC picnic at Churchill Woods. Third annual, I can't believe I'm saying that at this point. I remember we were planning the first one, so we're glad to be here for a third one. So we hope you can join us at that. We'll make some flyers for that soon. The September DuPage ROSC Council meeting, we'll be talking with Chicago Recovering Communities Coalition and hopefully Dr. Mary from NERCO to promote the recovery rally that's coming up in September. We actually have our ROSC presentation series in September is going to be Tom Farley, the brother of Chris Farley, talking about his own experiences in recovery, a little bit about his brother, and then also the work that he does now through Rosecrans. So we're glad that Becky from Rosecrans could help set that one up for us. And then, as I mentioned, that NERCO and CRCC recovery rally is on the 21st. Last little thing, the ROSC Council meeting in October is on the 9th, and we have our friends from the Way Back In talking about their services and the work they do with sober living. So having said all that, I'm going to go ahead and stop the share. And we'll talk about today's presentation. So if you've been joining us for these presentation series, you know that from time to time, we like to talk about different types of therapeutics that maybe are a little bit new or maybe people don't even know are out there. So, you know, we've talked about stuff like psychedelics for therapeutics. We talked about esketamine for treating trauma and PTSD. We talked about transcranial magnetic stimulation. And I'm glad we're able to have a presentation today on EMDR. So we're grateful to have April Difatta, and I'm glad I pronounced that right with the hand motion, from Grace Integrated to talk with us about EMDR. Grace Integrated has a few different locations in the Chicago area: Oak Brook, Riverside, Westmont, Lombard, and Chicago, in addition to telehealth. And we're glad to have her here with us. So April, I'm going to turn it over to you, and thank you for being here.
Thank you so much for having me. Let me go ahead and get this set up really quick. So, I want to make sure I can still see you guys too. Okay. So, well, hang on one second. I want to make sure I can still see you guys. I can just see my presentation.
No problem.
want to be able to see all you guys. All right, well, my name is April. Thank you so much for having me here. I'm very, I think, like pretty well versed in a lot of different things that you guys were just talking about. I went to school here in Glen Ellen, and then in a couple different areas, like in DuPage. I grew up in DuPage. I worked at.
Can we make sure everybody's muted, guys? So we can cut down on interruptions. Thank you.
I worked at NAMI DuPage. I am very familiar with Serenity House and a couple other nonprofit organizations in DuPage. So I'm glad to be here to share a couple different things and yeah, talk about basically one of my favorite topics in therapy. So a little bit about me. I'm a licensed professional counselor. I've had my license for 4 years now. I've worked at a couple different settings. I used to work in schools, therapeutic day schools. My main clientele, I've always wanted to work with kids and teenagers. So first started off in the school system, then moved to private practice. Right now, my clientele pretty much ranges from 6 years old to 36 years old. I like to keep it on like the younger side, about 50-50 whenever it comes to minors and then the young adults. I'm very much a trauma-focused therapist, so I see everything through the lens of trauma. I will be honest, I don't see too many like addiction related cases, but I have in the past a couple of people that I do see, but it's not necessarily my like main clientele. But trauma, however, is, and EMDR is great for that. And then we all know the correlation between trauma and addiction. So I think regardless, even if I don't talk too much about addiction today, that it's still going to relate to a lot of the people and the clients that we see. So I know that there's gonna be time at the end, and I want to keep an eye on the time for questions and whatnot. So hold them till then, unless someone wants to bring it up now or like throughout the presentation. But let's see. There we go. Okay. So today I'm going to be talking about a couple different things. I'm going to go over what is EMDR. I don't know how many people are familiar with it at all. Kind of explain why it's so great at dealing with trauma-related clients, and then how it is that can connect to addiction settings. I'm going to also talk a bit about 3 of my clients I've worked with for a couple of years with EMDR. Whenever I first learned EMDR, I've been using it for about 2.5 years now. So a lot of the clients that I have used EMDR on, like I already had an established relationship with them. So they're just clients I want to see like throughout time. And because otherwise, sometimes there are people who go to EMDR therapists just for like a couple of months just to get into EMDR and then move on, basically. But these are like my clients that they're going to be with me for a while. And I have some like resources at the end in case anyone wants to learn a little bit more about it. So first, going into it, what is EMDR? It stands for eye movement desensitization and reprocessing. So I'm going to go over all those different things, why the eye movements, why the desensitization and the reprocessing, how that all works together. So I'm going to go through that quickly. I have a couple different things to use there. Yeah, we're going to go into like the definition, the history really quick. My favorite thing to talk about whenever it comes to EMDR is that it was discovered on accident, basically. So if it wasn't for Francine Shapiro here in the late 1980s, going for a walk while thinking about things that were stressful to her, and then her kind of like noticing. So the story is that she was going through like a hard point in life. She was in school and whatnot and going through a couple different like health scares, and she realized whenever she was going on like her lunch walks that she would be thinking about all these stressful things coming up for her. And whenever she was walking, she would be looking down at the ground and she would look back and forth at her left and then right and then left and right foot. And then at the end of the walk, she would realize that she felt like less stressed and less activated in general about the things that she was thinking about. Then she took this to her peers, then to the colleagues, then it went through a series of like testing and peer-reviewed things and evidence-based, and now it's a very evidence-based therapeutic technique that has been used pretty well over these last like 20. It's been a while since the 1980s, actually, so almost like 30 or 40 years. So we're going to talk about the bilateral stimulation, which comes from the eye movements. I'll explain that, and then how it is that we discovered that it helps rewire the brain, and how it is that we remember things and feel things and whatnot. So thank you, Francine Shapiro, for going for walks, basically. So the left and right, the eye movements, is now basically called bilateral stimulation. At first, we thought it was just eye movement looking back and forth that would help mimic the REM cycle. So it's a little bit of a complicated situation. So I'm hopefully gonna like explain it well. So while they were doing the research to find out like why looking left and right, why does this help? And after doing a bunch of different brain studies and whatnot, we know that whenever we process our memories, we're doing it in our REM cycle whenever we're sleeping. That's whenever our brain is like, let's kind of like consolidate things, file away things properly. And so that's whenever our eyes are darting back and forth. We're not entirely sure how it works, but it works. So we realized that the eye movement left and right, but also any other thing that has to do with bilateral stimulation, anything that crosses the midline of your body. So frequently whenever we're using EMDR, we have like one of these fancy light bars that we can control that has a light going back and forth. I use this a lot whenever I am working with in-person clients. You can control the color. A lot of times whenever I work with kids, they like to pick the different colors and control how fast and slow it can go. But then we also have these buzzer things that you can hold in your hands, and it'll buzz in your left, then buzz in the right, and go back and forth. You can also put headphones on, and it'll make a tone here and then tone there. If I'm doing telehealth, I can still do EMDR over telehealth. I'll have clients do tapping back and forth. And I have clients doing a whole bunch of different ways when it comes to tapping. Some of them will tap back and forth on their knees. One of the clients I'm going to be talking about later on today, she will sit here and tap back and forth on her temples, and she has done some amazing processing. So I'm kind of like thinking about encouraging some of my other clients to try this back and forth on their temples, because she has processed through things very quickly. It has been very cool. So in general, the bilateral stimulation comes from the EM, the eye movement. They didn't want to change the whole name of EMDR, so they just kept it as EMDR, but it's more than just eye movements. And it works because it mimics the REM cycle during your sleep, which helps integrate our memories into like the long-term memory center of our brain. The main model that EMDR like follows basically is the belief that psychological issues stem from poorly processed traumatic experiences or traumatic memories, and then trauma disrupts memory processing and then leads to triggers, aka like stuck memories and whatnot. So the best way that I can describe the adaptive information processing model, the AIP model, is the body wants to heal itself. The body itself has a lot of protectors built into it and repairing mechanisms built into it. If you get a cut on your hand, your body knows how to like basically repair that. You can help it by washing it, putting a Band-Aid on it and whatnot. So there's things that our body can naturally do, and then we ourselves can kind of like assist it. If we break a bone, the bone technically will heal on its own. But if you don't like set it back into place and I don't know, kind of like help the wound and whatnot, it's going to heal, but it's not going to heal totally well. And it might lead to like issues down the line. But if we're able to like step in, put a cast on it, put some pins on it, whatever it is that it needs, then it can properly heal and just like assisting the body in its natural like healing process. And until like we started to learn about EMDR, the other thing that you guys were talking about earlier, the transcranial magnetic, that kind of stuff. There's also brain spotting, neurofeedback, a couple other ways that we're actually able to like manually assist the brain in healing. So we didn't really have a way to do that until these last like 40-ish years. So EMDR basically allows us to put a cast on some part of the wounded brain because of trauma. So the brain knows how to heal itself, but because of stuck memories or traumatic memories, sometimes it can have a harder time. So EMDR, we can basically like step in, manually assist the person in healing this memory, set of memories, all that kind of stuff. So for stuck memories, some memories get stuck. Some things that we have happen in our life will get stuck, and those will lead to triggers that will lead to flashbacks and will lead to things like PTSD, and then just like getting stuck in the fight or flight mode, basically. So first of all, there's a lot of different ways that we can define trauma. So I looked up a couple different definitions that we use. Some people define it as perceived threats of, or an actual threat of death, serious injury, or violence. Other people define it as deeply distressing or disturbing experiences, or experiences of very stressful, frightening, or distressing events that are difficult to cope with and or are out of our control. And the definition that I personally like both best, and I think the CDC and the like DSM, the APA, use physical, cognitive, or emotional response caused by a traumatic event, series of events, or set of circumstances that is experienced as harmful or life-threatening. Because not all trauma is just exposure to death, serious or injury, or violence. It can be anything from you witnessed a car accident, or Johnny laughed at you in 3rd grade and now you don't trust people, basically. So there's a lot of different ways that we can define trauma, and we don't get to choose which ones our brain classify as trauma and which ones we don't. There can be two people in the exact same car accident. One of them walks out unable to go back into cars, has developed like pretty severe PTSD about this car accident, and then the other person walks out like, that sucked, but like, I'm okay. Our brain decides that, we don't. So there's a lot of different talks about like big T and little t trauma. That's kind of like a controversial thing. I don't know how you guys feel about that, but the reason that we can step in with EMDR using the AIP model and whatnot is, the way that I like to describe it is that our memories have like 2 parts to them. They have the data, the who, what, when, where, why, what was experienced, what did everything look like, just the pure data of it, basically. And then you have the feelings part of it. This is where it hurt. This is how the embarrassment felt. And this is how my body responded to it. Whenever we're in our REM cycle, our brain is naturally supposed to go through those different memories, consolidate them by splitting those 2 things apart, storing the data. We only need to know the who, what, when, where, why. I know I felt embarrassed. I know I felt this way, but I don't need to relive what it is that it felt like. So it's supposed to separate those things, store the data, and then the actual physical responses, our body actually feeling the embarrassed, or the pain of the car accident, kind of goes away. The brain's like, we don't need that. We don't need to remember or to re-experience what it is that made us feel. But whenever something is defined as traumatic in our brain, again, our brain decides that, not us. Whenever we're supposed to be consolidating that, like in our sleep, like the bells and whistles go off, our fight and flight system goes on. That's a separate note. Some people believe that that's where like some of our nightmares come from, is because the brain's trying to like reprocess those things, but it's like, can't do it. It's too painful. There's too much happening here. So it tries to separate those things, but it's not able to. And then it kind of just bounces around our brain in limbo for a long time. And that's why anytime that something reminds us of a stressful situation, that one memory that we're trying to process, for example, the car crash. Anytime that something comes up and reminds us of that or triggers us, the brain's like, okay, cool, here's this memory again. Can we please try to process it this time? So the brain, like the triggers basically are the brain's way of saying, okay, let's deal with it this time properly, please. But then whenever we're sleeping, it doesn't get processed properly, and then it just keeps going. So that's what leads to a lot of the traumatic responses that we see in clients, and some of these memories like don't get processed. And the thing about like trauma, like sure, we could have like those one-off situations where it's like, okay, just related to the car accident. But we know a lot of people, their trauma comes from complex trauma. There's like one example of something, witnessing one event, but then there's also never feeling good enough as a kid. And that's over thousands of memories, or being teased, or not feeling good enough, or witnessing addiction in the family. So there can be one trigger to one event, like a car accident, and then there can be thousands of triggers to thousands of events in our lifetime. So those are more so the clients that I think that we typically see in the addiction setting, and then like on my trauma side of things. So there's a couple different types of EMDR protocols. I'm going to go through the most standard protocol, an 8-phase approach, so that you guys can kind of like understand what a client would be going through to like start off this process. But the good thing is that there's a couple different ways that we can approach it. It's very versatile. I think I didn't mention this in the first couple slides. It was originally used to treat traumatic memories, but we can also use it to treat depression, anxiety, low self-esteem, pretty much anything nowadays. We're able to use EMDR. But there are a couple different like protocols, like here are these different steps that you use. And there's ones for recent traumatic incidents, and this is something that we use a lot for like first responders, who just experienced something like awful, and we try to get in there, and before the memory completely like solidifies, sets in there with all the different triggers, we try to get to it and help the brain process it there in that moment, without it like really like settling in there. There's also the main EMDR company, it's called EMDR. That's where we do all the trainings and all that kind of stuff. They have a group of therapists from like all different places of the world that will go out to places of natural disasters and sit down with like people and help them process through whatever it is that they have just experienced. So that's a pretty cool thing too. I think like that's like a nonprofit. And then there's group traumatic EMDR, which is people who have experienced something similar. They all can kind of like process through it together. And then there's also future template protocol, which is the standard protocol. We go back and we process something in the past. Future template means, I have a couple examples. I have a client that's in med school, and they really go through it in med school, and they have to take like 11-hour tests, like a couple times throughout their time there. And I had a client visualize themselves going in to take the test in a confident way, visualizing themselves sitting down at the computer, and they would think about like, oh, well, I would get nervous here, I'd get nervous here. And then we basically make them like fantasize about the best way to take the test. And so typically whenever they actually go to take the test or go to the interview that they're like worried about or anything else like that, they kind of have already prepped their body to take care of that situation. And they often report feeling like, I felt more confident about it. The anxiety was reduced around that. So going into like the main, whenever you hear about EMDR, this is pretty much like what it looks like. So there's a big history taking and planning step at first. Now, like I was saying, I already knew my clients. I already knew all my clients' like history and the trauma they had experienced whenever I started seeing them, and I started doing EMDR with them like months, if not years down the road. So I already knew all this kind of stuff. But if you're starting with like a new client, they are going to take an extensive history, taking and planning to kind of conceptualize a whole map of like your trauma, basically. What are the different triggers? What are the main memories? So that we can kind of like branch it all out and see what needs to be focused on. And the good thing about EMDR is that it very much has like a trickle down effect. So one of the main things that we approach and like target in EMDR is not necessarily just the memories, but how it is that that memory made you feel. So we'll be like, okay, yep, here's the car crash, but how did you feel coming out of it? I felt like it was my fault. I felt like I did something wrong. I feel like I'm a bad person because I feel like I was responsible for that accident and it hurt somebody. So the main thing that we target using EMDR is that I'm a bad person or I did something wrong. It's usually a lot of I statements. And then we use the image from the car accident and the like physical response, the pain that comes along with the car accidents to target that belief, and then all of that can be desensitized. I have an example of what that looks like in a video like right after this, so you guys can kind of get a look at what does the desensitizing like process look like. But also there is a lot of client preparation. So we will go through a couple different types of what we call like resourcing. So since we are going to be in EMDR going through some people's like deepest, darkest trauma, we obviously want to make sure that they are stable enough to do so, and then have a lot of resources, coping skills to help regulate their nervous system by the end of the session. We do a lot of like rating scales throughout the session, like how do you feel on a scale of 0 to 10? And by the end of a session, if we haven't been able to like get that person down past like a 5 and under, like they're kind of like okay, I obviously don't want to just be like, see you next week, hope you're okay. So at the end of every session, we will go to either like a safe space or do like a container exercise to help a person calm down their body, calm down their nervous system, separate themselves from the traumatic incident that they were just like reliving, basically, so that they can go back out into the real world and not be all the way up here in a dysregulated state of mind. One of my favorites ways to approach this is to use what we call the safe space. That's your very typical, like, imagine yourself in a beach or in a cabin in the woods. I'll have my clients go way into detail about like make your own safe space. So some people choose like one of those more typical ones, like a beach or the woods. Other people pick something that's from a movie. Other people completely make up their own safe space that does not have to make sense to anybody but them. And I have them think of something that's in the safe space that will bring up like all their different senses. So what are you seeing? How blue is that sky? Are there clouds in it? What are you hearing? Are you hearing birds? What kind of birds are you hearing? Do you hear the like wind going through like the trees and whatnot? Is there music in the background? Is there something that you're feeling? Are you walking barefoot on the grass? So they can really immerse themselves into the safe space. So not only are we having them look at something that's pretty and whatnot, but also really making them think about what it is that feels calm about this place, what it is that feels safe about this place, so that whenever they are done through the processing side of their session and they're moving into like the resourcing side of it, they can really jump into this safe space. And we pair it with the bilateral stimulation. So we'll be having them think about their safe space while doing the eye movement or the tapping. And that in and of itself, the bilateral stimulation can like automatically calm down the nervous system too, especially whenever it's paired with something positive. For the assessment parts of it, that's really just making sure that the client is in a stable enough space to like process through these things. But for a while, we were having trouble doing EMDR with clients who would dissociate a lot. So that was the assessment part, pretty much seeing how much a person dissociates. And there's like a scale that we use for that. But there's been a lot of new stuff out there that really help us use EMDR for people with dissociation like tendencies too. So that's not necessarily like an issue or anything like that. We just want to be aware of if a person dissociates and how much and what, like, just to keep an eye out for it basically. So I have a 6 or 7-ish minute. Oh, no, I do not. I'm going to play a video just for a couple minutes so you guys can kind of get an idea of what it looks like to kind of like work through a little bit of the session. So I'm just going to play this for a teensy tiny bit. Let's see. I'm going to go right here. Oh, actually, I'm going to teensy bit. So this is a fake situation, and the woman here, who's playing the patient, is processing through feeling like she was in trouble a lot as a kid and feeling like she wasn't a good daughter. So I just want to give you like a little bit of an example of what it is that looks like.
Okay, Mom.
I just had this memory of my mom being outside my door, like calling my name.
Go with it. Okay, Mom.
I remember I thought she was, coming back to yell at me some more, but I think she was more concerned that I was all alone in my room because even though they yelled at me, they didn't want me to be upset and alone.
Okay, go with it. Okay, Mom.
I guess maybe I feel, I don't know, a little better, like just that when she came to, talk to me or was calling my name, it made me think maybe I wasn't like the worst daughter ever, like, because she was still a little concerned about me, even though she was mad at me.
Okay. Would you be able to go back to that original image for me? Can you get that back up?
Sure. Mm-hmm.
Do you notice any disturbance?
Okay. So I just wanted to give you guys like a little bit of an example of, we do a set, the back and forth like this. A lot of people don't do that anymore. That's like a very old school way of doing EMDR. Some people will still do it that way though. So we'll do a set maybe like 10 to 15, sometimes we'll go up to 30 seconds of allowing the person to basically bring up that memory. So they'll be thinking about, for example, the car accident. What did it look like? What did it sound like? They'll be pairing it with the, I did something wrong, I'm a bad person. And with each set, or looking back and forth or tapping, it's kind of like each set we do, it's taking away like a little, like diluting it a little bit, if you would like see it that way, of, oh my gosh, I'm an awful person, I can't believe that happened, it was an awful wreck. And then like after a couple sets, then it'll be like, yeah, that was really awful, but like I was paying attention as much as I could, I shouldn't have been on my phone, so I feel like a bad person still. And then after a couple more sets, it'll turn into, everyone uses their phone whenever they're texting, like I'm not a terrible person, like the other person that I hit was also texting, so like I know that I shouldn't have been doing that, but okay, I'm gonna do more. And that just like breaks it down even more. So by the end of it, the person is less activated by it, the images don't trigger them, They're feeling less like like a bad person, for example. And the last part about EMDR, kind of going back, oh, okay. So yeah, here we go. Okay, so the installation process, I'm gonna go through that just really quick. The installation process is not only are we gonna desensitize the bad parts, so making the car crash a lot less activating for the brain, but then kind of like this, but I'm really not a bad person. Like I really didn't mean to do that. So once that person kind of makes that switch over to not that bad of a person, we then find a positive belief to kind of install instead. So we'll go from the negative one, which is I'm a bad person, to the positive one of I can control what I can in the future, or I'll make better choices in the future. And then we paired that with like the negative thought. So I'll have them thinking about like the car accident and then the I'll make better choices in the future. And then that installs in them. So whenever we think back at the end of all of this, they'll think back to the situation and think to themselves, okay, that car accident happened. I know I felt like I was a bad person. I know that I felt embarrassed. I know that this did hurt me. But I'm going to make better choices in the future and feel like more empowered by it instead. We're not wiping their memory. It's not like they're not going to remember the car accident. It's not like they're going to look back in it and be like, I did a great job or anything like that. But it's going to allow the person to heal that memory in an adaptive, healthy, realistic way. 1 second. So these last couple minutes, sorry, I totally ran out of time, but I did kind of want to talk a little bit about some of the clients that I see and a couple different things that they have like experienced through this. I'm going to talk about, for sure, my first one, Sally, my 27-year-old white female, married, mother of one. I've been seeing her since January 2023. So she's diagnosed with OCD, generalized anxiety disorder, and then CPTSD, complex post-traumatic stress disorder. She had a history of really bad childhood trauma, verbal abuse, physical abuse, lots of neglect, possible sexual abuse. There's a lot of gaps for a lot of people who have experienced like traumatic childhoods. They'll often be like, I don't remember this year. I don't remember who my second grade teacher was, or I don't remember that. The good thing about EMDR is that even if we don't have clear images of what it is, this like, oh gosh. Even if we don't have clear images about what that memory looked like, it's okay, we can still process it. There's like this part of EMDR that we know of that we can actually like access memories back from before memories were even being processed or like formed. Basically, we can process through things that happen whenever you're a baby. That's what I'm basically trying to say there. And they had a lot of negative thoughts of I'm a bad person, or I'm not allowed to express my emotions. I have to take care of others. She was always very like a self-serving person, wanted to meet the needs of her mother because she was all, like abused by her and whatnot. But even as an adult, she felt very unable to take care of her own self, did not like recognize her own feelings. And so we would work through things such as memories of her mom not listening to her whenever she had clearly a broken arm, and helping the client process through that pain that she was experiencing, because whenever she felt like she was being ignored, she knows that her like arm would hurt because it was bringing up memories similar to that. And we would focus on the I don't deserve to express my emotions, and we turned it into the I am allowed to express my emotions. Sometimes it is just like an opposite of that, from an I'm a bad person to I'm a good person. And so she was able to work through some of those memories of my mom didn't care about me, and it would turn into no one cared about me, and then it would turn into, well, some of the teachers kind of cared about me, and then it turned into, well, like I care about myself and I would never do that to my daughter. but my mom was also an addict, so I understand why that was happening. It kind of just helps them like process through like what the actual like reality of that was, because the way that she was remembering that memory was from whenever she was like 8 years old, in a very much like a fear-based, I have no power here, basically. And now whenever she thinks back on that, her arm doesn't hurt anymore, and she's able to then realize like, yep, not a fan of what it is that my mother did to me, but she doesn't control me anymore. I control myself. I know that I'm allowed to express myself. That's very much like a very quick version of what it is that happens there. But that is the thing about EMDR, is that it's actually like a really quick process. After you get through like the history and like the deciding what memories to like target, the actual sitting down, processing through it with the bilateral whatnot, that can only take maybe like 2 or 3 sessions to go through like an entire traumatic memory or a set of traumatic memories. So that is the very cool thing about EMDR. You can do the work that normal cognitive behavioral therapy could do in like the set of like 3 years in like 3 sessions. So that is the good thing about that. And another reason that EMDR can be very helpful for people who have like lots of triggers and whatnot is that, sure, we have them go back and think about the memory, but it's different from what it is that you would experience for like exposure therapy. We're having them take a peek at the memory, not completely immersing themselves in there, because we're keeping them in the here and now with the bilateral simulation. So they don't get completely sucked into the memory. And if they do, to be like, I want you to think about the pain, unfortunately. And if at first they're like up to a 10, within like 2 or 3 sets, they're already like back down to like a 7 or a 6. So we do sometimes get a person up to that like their window of tolerance, like on like the edge of it, to be like they're not having a good time right now, but that doesn't ever last for more than like a couple minutes for them. So it's a quick treatment, has lots of good results for it. It can work really well in basically helping a person completely consolidate and rewire how it is that they think about their childhood trauma that obviously can sometimes lead to like addiction and whatnot. So I'm going to stop sharing now because I want to be able to see you guys. That was a lot of information. I wanted to leave some time here for some questions and whatnot. So
Yeah.
please.
Thank you, April. It was a great presentation. We appreciate it. Yeah, I'll open it up for a few minutes for questions or comments. I just wanted to say my own personal experience, I have not sought out EMDR treatment for myself. One of my best friends has started EMDR treatment a couple of years ago for a very traumatic experience where he was involved in a car accident, and someone who was with him died on the scene, and he was there with it while that happened. And he tried a lot of the, quote unquote, like traditional routes of dealing with it. So what did that look like for him? It was probably, one-on-one therapeutics, possibly some medication, and he was just getting no relief, from any of those routes. And he was, in talking to him about it, he was maybe a little skeptical at first before he went into it. And then afterwards, he like swears by it. Like he said, it was the only thing that was able to help him, not only heal from that, but help, like you talked about, kind of rewire those particular memories and the way that he was, thinking about them and obsessing about them. And so, I've seen it work, really, really well for people who had no other recourse for dealing with their own trauma. But the question I have is, the people that you see, the people that seek this treatment, is it often people who have tried other routes for this stuff and it hasn't worked? Or is this like a first option for some people? What do you see generally in like your practice, who's seeking the treatment?
Yeah, I do see it. It's like people who have tried more traditional therapies or were afraid to try more traditional therapies, and so they avoided therapy in general, but then they heard about this and they heard that they don't really have to like talk about their trauma as much, so they're like, I just want to try this out. But for the most part, it's people who have been in therapy for like 8 years and they really are not having a whole lot of success and whatnot. I also have received EMDR. I went through quite a lot of it during like COVID. So I also know like what it feels like to have those memories like really come down for you. So, but yeah, usually it's people who have experienced a lot, have been in and out of like more extreme care for like psychiatric histories. But then I also will have people who are like, I have this going on, and I'm like, let's just cut to it. Let's just do some EMDR. And they're like, well, that was great. Thank you.
That's awesome. Thank you. So yeah, if anybody has questions or comments, you can raise your tiny digital hand. I see Ben's got his up. Ben, go right ahead.
April, thank you for this presentation. I first was made aware of EMDR through Bessel van der Kolk's book about the body keeps the score. And I was always kind of frustrated by just not enough information, that it was like, this sounds kind of like I'm getting hypnotized or something. I don't know, some sort of a weird thing. But anyway, I'm more accepting of it as time goes on, and having worked with traumatized individuals, when they are experiencing their trauma, it's like it's happening now. And the idea of moving that into the memory, and being able to understand in a real way that it's what happened and it's not what's happening.
Right.
Is really cool. But there were a couple of things that I don't know. I think I hope you can address. And one was the demonstration video where they showed the woman is holding a couple of objects in her hands.
Yeah, so I was going to go into more of that. That was like these buzzers that they can hold. So instead
what's the function of that?
It's basically, it does the exact same thing as the eye movements. That video I picked to show that not only did they do the eye movements, I didn't have enough time. I cut it off right whenever she was about to hold the buzzers, and they basically just sit there with their eyes closed and hold the buzzers. And it's doing the exact same thing, but without the actual like manual eye movements. And then
So
later
the buzzers sound back and forth.
Yes, they buzz back and forth in their hands.
Okay, yeah. I got you. The other thing which I struggle to understand is the concept of tapping.
Yeah. So there's a couple different kinds of tapping. There's like the EFT tapping where they're like tapping on different like points in their body. That's not the tapping that we use, but more so like tapping back and forth on their shoulders or on their knees, or like I said, I have the client that does that. It's just anything that will activate both sides of their body at different times.
So is that something like activating both sides of the brain or something? Or okay.
Yes.
So this thing this alternation that kind of makes it happen. Okay. All right.
Yes. Cool. Some people say it's just something to keep the mind busy while it's processing through those things. Some people say it's because it's replicating that REM cycle. They're not completely too sure what's happening there. They just know that it happens.
But they are sure that it works.
They're sure that it works.
Okay, so that's all that matters, really, huh?
Right.
Okay, thank you. I'm sorry.
Thank you.
I didn't mean to take up all this time.
Thanks, Ben. Who else has got a question or comment? Blake.
Hi, thank you for the presentation. I had a question. Given the different ways to facilitate EMDR, is there one that shows any statistically different treatments with the tapping versus eye movements versus the buzzers?
They have shown that there really isn't too much of a big difference. So the only reason that we would choose one or the over the other is sometimes if to have the eyes open and to like be looking back and forth, sometimes people have like a hard time like immersing themselves back into that memory or whatnot. So sometimes it is better to have their eyes closed and to like do the tapping, or even that sometimes is like too distracting. So sometimes I have them hold the buzzers. I have seen that some of my clients who have more so like ADHD or attention issues, I'll have them close their eyes and like hold the buzzers so that they don't have as much like stimulation bothering them. But we haven't seen that like buzzers are less effective than the eye movements or anything.
Thank you.
Follow-up question to that. Are there any new and emerging ways to facilitate this?
So there is something that I'm looking into that's, I don't know if you guys have heard about brain spotting, but it's like something that's come from EMDR, which is really, really cool, it's a whole other thing that's really hard to explain. But since EMDR is on like the newer side, people are using that, and then they're like, oh, hey, there's this other thing that really, really helps. So other things that I know that I'll use for like other types of like bilateral stimulation is like I work with a lot of kids, so I'll have them like stomp in place. Or I've seen other people will like, especially for like little boys who really don't want to engage in like lots of different kinds of therapy, is I've seen that people will have like a fake like foam sword, and we'll have a kid like kneeling in like a knight's like position, basically, to be like, think about your like your war stories, think about all the things that you've done, and I'm going to knight you. So they'll tap back and forth on their shoulders, basically, like over and over. Like, think about it, like you're an amazing knight. So they really can like install that. That's more so for kids, but can be used for adults too. I don't see why not.
Interesting.
Thank you.
Thanks, Blake. Got a couple more minutes. Anybody else?
I got a question / comment. In April, I think I might have asked you this before, so sorry if I'm repeating myself. But I remember hearing one time that people that go through like a traumatic event, if they play Tetris like right after, it's supposed to like help them kind of not get like traumatized from it or get like the PTSD from it. Is that something you've heard of? Or because I feel like it might kind of simulate the EMDR.
Right. Yeah, I've heard of that, and I've looked into that, and I'm actually going to try to find like a handheld, like get like an old Game Boy or something, so I can bring that into session. I'm not really too sure like how it is that helps. I don't know if it's helping with like eye movement, but it had, from what it is that I saw, it's like kind of teaching the brain that like we can like consolidate things and then like delete them. I think it's just like the actual part of Tetris that you're looking to make the things fit into certain places. Not really too sure, but I have seen that it has worked, and I'm actually like looking into that too. I use a lot of like video game stuff in my therapy sessions with different ages, so I think it's helpful for some reason. We don't need to know why. It just needs we just know it works.
A wonderful presentation. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Danielle. We got about 1 minute left. Anyone have any closing comment or question for April? If not, how about this? April, what's the best way to access these services? So if we've got a client that might benefit from EMDR, how can we refer them?
Well, for sure, I love using Psychology Today. It's kind of like a search engine for finding therapists or psychiatrists, and there is a section in there to like click on, I want an EMDR therapist. So that's a really quick, easy way to find one that also takes your insurance, that also can like specialize in recovery or addiction or anything else like that. But it's a very commonly found thing nowadays. I feel like a couple of years ago it's like a little bit hard to find, but now lots of therapists are getting trained in this, so it's probably a little bit easier to find one nowadays. And you can do it over telehealth too, so you don't have to find somebody that you have to see in person.
Yeah, well, that's great. April, thank you so much for the presentation. Wonderful information. I'm going to post this on the YouTube hopefully a little bit later today. So if you know somebody that missed it, or maybe you would benefit from the presentation, feel free to share that. So I'm going to go ahead and let everybody get back to their day. Thanks again, April, and we'll see everybody next month.
Thank you so much.
Thanks,
Bye,
April.